The Shakespeare Nostrati, written by Ben Jonson, presented to you by Dr. Vinamrata. Hello, my dear students. Today we are going to analyze a critical essay which is prescribed in your syllabus and is written by Ben Jonson, and it's a very short piece of work and epigrammatic in nature. Although very short and brief, it has got layers of meanings. And actually, Ben Jonson and Shakespeare were contemporaries. So, when we are talking about Ben Jonson and Shakespeare, we have to also look at their works, their timeline, their achievements at that time. And although they were contemporaries, they were also considered as rivals. So let's have a look into their timeline and what was the cause of the rivalry between them, and then if they were rivals, then why Ben Jonson devotes his poetry or his this critical piece to Shakespeare. So let's begin. First, let's have a look onto their timelines. Shakespeare, 26th of April 1564 to 23rd of April 1616, whereas Ben Jonson, 11th June 1572 to 16th of August 1637. Now you see, Shakespeare died before Jonson, and although they were staunch rivals in the early periods of their time, but by the time they were becoming old, by the time Shakespeare was on the verge of his death or was getting old, and also Ben Jonson too, they both became friends because Shakespeare also helped Jonson in many of his works. Now, when we are talking about these two playwrights, let's have a quick look onto their career and their achievements. Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet, and an actor. He was the greatest writer in the English language and the world's greatest dramatist. As we all know, he needs no introduction. He was called the England's national poet and the Bard of Avon. He has written comedies, histories, tragicomedies, and tragedies. His important tragedies, which are masterpieces actually, are Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Whereas when we talk about Ben Jonson, again, Ben Jonson was also an Englishman, a playwright, a poet, and he was the person who popularized the comedy of humors. He talked about four humors which govern any human being, and in every human body there are these four humors, and their being excessive or less in nature can govern their body type and can govern their nature. So his plays like Every Man in His Humor, Every Man Out of His Humor, Volpone, The Alchemist, and Bartholomew Fair are some of the important works. Now we have seen that Shakespeare is being called Bard of Avon. On the contrary, Ben Jonson also wrote lyrical poems and epigrammatic poetry, and he was called the poet's poet. So see, they both are parallel, but Shakespeare shooted out like a star, and his personality, his charisma, his writings, his popularity seemed to overshadow Jonson. And at that time, when Jonson spoke or criticized something about Shakespeare, people used to ridicule it a lot, telling or categorizing them as rivals, and categorizing Jonson to be jealous of Shakespeare. So let's look into those works which Jonson has written in praise of Shakespeare, and also what he has to say in it. Now, this is the first poem which Jonson composed in the memory of Shakespeare. This was written after Shakespeare's death, and although they were contemporaries and rivals, as we have already discussed, but later they became friends. And on the release of Shakespeare's first folio, Ben Jonson wrote a poem in praise of Shakespeare, and this is the poetry we have here. And it was first published in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death, and was included in the first folio of Shakespeare's work. The poem is a long poetry, and we are not going into its detail because it is not there in your syllabus, But four lines I'll try to read, the first four lines, which says, "To draw no envy, Shakespeare, on thy name. Am I thus ample to thy book and fame? While I confess thy writings to be such as neither man nor muse can praise too much." So Shakespeare has written in such a way, his writings are to such a great extent and level that even muse and any man will not be able to praise till the amount, till the extent Shakespeare has written. So this was the idea of Shakespeare in the mind of Jonson. Now we come to the work. The work which is there in your syllabus, which is titled D. Shakespeare Nostrati, which means for Shakespeare writing. So he is talking or explaining about Shakespeare's writings in this piece of work. It was published in Timber or Discoveries in 1641, and let's read it out first. "I remember the players have often mentioned it as an honor to Shakespeare that in his writings, whatsoever he penned, he never blotted out a line. My answer hath been, would he had blotted 1,000. Now, this was what Ben Jonson said about Shakespeare, because people used to say that Shakespeare, while writing his plays, never deleted any word or never deleted any line. He was so free flow in writing that he just pulled up his pen and could write all the play without deleting, omitting any word, any line. So this was a kind of exaggeration maybe, and Ben Jonson disliked it and Ben Jonson criticized it. For that, Ben Jonson was criticized a lot, because Ben Jonson said that who knows, maybe Shakespeare had blotted lines, or if he would have blotted, maybe he would have written better. Because you see, you learn from your mistakes. If you learn to point out your mistakes and try omitting those errors, you come out to be a better person, or if you're a writer, you come out to be a better writer. So Ben Jonson had something else in mind, but he was taken into a different consideration. So he says that I said that, for that I was misinterpreted, which they thought, means the people thought, that was a malevolent speech. It was not a good speech, it was a hate speech made by Jonson against Shakespeare. People thought so. I had not told posterity this, means to the people, to the XYZ people who were narrating these tales, he had not told this, but of their ignorance. But because of their ignorance, the people who were ignorant interpreted it in a different way, who choose that circumstance to be commend their friend by wherein he most faulted, and to justify mine own candour, for I loved the man and do honour his memory on his side adulatory as much as any. So he says that the people who called themselves to be Shakespeare's friend, they would have hinted out this to Shakespeare in a positive way, but they did it in a negative way and maligned my name and told that I want to somewhere or the other hamper Shakespeare's reputation, whereas the case was not so. And if they would have not done that, maybe Shakespeare would have written even better. And then he says that I do honor Shakespeare and I still do honor him, and he is like an idol to me and I keep on worshipping him. He was indeed honest and an open and free nature. Means Shakespeare was honest, he was open, he free and free. Whatever he felt like, he wrote it down without any hesitation. He had an excellent fancy, brave notions and gentle expressions, wherein he flowed with that facility that sometimes it was necessary he should be stopped. So he says that sometimes when you're very easygoing, what happens? You just put up your pen and you start writing things and you don't give it a check. So because of his free flow nature, because of his frank nature, many times Shakespeare overlooked small things which he should have taken into account. And he says that it was necessary, for he should have been stopped. Sufflaminandus erat, as Augustus said of Hadrius. So Sufflaminandus erat is a Latin word which means his wit was in his own power. This was said by Augustus to Hadrian, which meant that your mind, your brain, your wit, your intelligence is in your own control, is in your own power. Whatever or however you will guide it, it will act in that way. So Shakespeare was free flowing, he acted in that way, unable to check his mistakes. So that was the biggest mistake of Shakespeare. Would the rule of it had been so too? Many times he fell into those things, could not escape laughter. And he says that many times Shakespeare wrote such things which evoked laughter, which was funny, which was mistakes done by Shakespeare, which he could have corrected. But the people would not tell him out those things, and that's why the mistake continued. Like he gives us an example from Julius Caesar, where Caesar says, when one person told to Caesar, Caesar, thou dost do me wrong. Caesar replied, Caesar did never wrong, but with just cause, and such like, which were ridiculous. So he says that when Caesar was told that Caesar, you are doing me wrong, you are doing something wrong, Caesar said that Caesar never does anything wrong, and even if he does anything wrong, that is for some good reason. Now this statement, according to Jonson, is very ridiculous statement to make, because either you are wrong or you are right. How come you can be right but not wrong, or you can be wrong but not right? Means Julius Caesar is actually confused himself, and not Julius Caesar. Actually Shakespeare is confused himself, because Caesar is saying that Caesar never does anything wrong, and even if he does anything wrong, it is for something right. So how it is wrong then if he is doing something for right? So there is a kind of confusion here which Jonson tries to point out. And he says that, but he redeemed his vices with his virtues. So these last two lines are very important, where he praises Shakespeare and says that although these were the mistakes made by Shakespeare, but these mistakes were so trivial, so small, that his virtues were large enough to overshadow these small mistakes. There was ever more to him to be praised than to be pardoned. So we can pardon him on these small follies, on these small mistakes, because he has so many more things to be praised. So that is all about this short essay. It is very, very epigrammatic, and it contains so many things, although very short and precise, but it is a real critical piece of work. Now the analysis of it. Thus, in this short piece of prose, we see Jonson praising Shakespeare, and he starts with the fact that some people believed that Shakespeare was such a great genius that he never deleted or rewrote any line in his plays while writing. Jonson had commented and ridiculed on this while Shakespeare was alive. And here he justifies himself, saying that he said that keeping the fact in mind that even if Shakespeare would have blotted or deleted 1,000 lines, still his works are outstanding. People misinterpreted his words, which were actually in praise of Shakespeare and not to demean him. It had no malice for the man, and was just because of the frank nature of Jonson that he spoke the truth. Sufflaminandus erat. His wit was in his own power. Jonson uses these lines by Augustus to describe Hadrian, saying Shakespeare was the same, but when wit fails, it arouses laughter. Same was with Shakespeare. Jonson further gives the example of Julius Caesar, where Shakespeare, through the character of Caesar, says that Caesar never does wrong, and even if he does so, it is due to some good reason. This, according to Jonson, is a laughable thing to say and to write. It makes no proper sense. Still, Jonson says that the good or the virtue in Shakespeare's works are so much so that the small errors, small vices, small mistakes can be ignored. It is a brief epigrammatic work by Jonson, full of layers of meaning. One can go peeling off meaning layer by layer like an onion. So that is all, and one last statement for all of my students to remember. Sufflaminandus erat. His wit
was in his own power. So your wits are in your own power. Use them well, study well. All the best and thank you.